Patrick, Antoine, all the way from sunny Trinidad in the Caribbean. What a pleasure to have you as part of our world first 24-hour non-stop global ideas and strategy and coming together, networking and collaboration for all the people around the world. So welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, John, my friend. It's a pleasure to be here with you and to all of the collaborators, and certainly to all those who will be looking at this when you do air it. I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
So, Patrick, you are Dr. Patrick?
Yes, my PhD is in actually economics, international trade and finance, macroeconomics, and production economics. So I'm a pure economist. So the PhD is that way.
Very good. So well versed for some of the things that you've been doing. So Patrick, you were born obviously in the Caribbean. What were the joys and what were the constraints about being brought up in such an idyllic location?
Well, John, the more I've traveled the world, is the more I've come to recognize that the smallness, what we call the islandness of the Caribbean, was really an important facet, an important ingredient in the person that I am. And I think I've been very fortunate because, growing up in a small island, you have the benefit of having a society and a community collaborate in raising you. So, whether it was education or health or sports, you had a tremendous support network around you. Of course, it started at the home. My mother and father and extended family, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, my brothers. But the community at large supported you, so that what I am today is in fact a product of an island, community, society. I
first ran across,
the drawbacks are also as it is. When you're in an island, you tend to think at times that the island is in fact the world. It's not something we say often, but your existentiality really around islandness can, if you're not cautious, cause you to think in a constrained manner. Of course, I wasn't affected by that because of my upbringing. I traveled the world with my parents, but that's the drawback. We have to be careful about that, but the pluses outweigh the minuses.
Yeah, very interesting. So Patrick, you've been on a consultant to Caricom for the last 18 years. Can you just share with the people out there what Caricom does, what its objective?
Yeah, well, thanks, John. I've been the ambassador and a consultant to the government of Grenada. I'm a consultant now to the private sector in Caricom, working with Caricom, and this institution, Caricom, really has to be thought about as a construct that began many years ago. It's a construct for economic integration by the peoples of the Caribbean that really is in fact the crucible, the coming together of many years of dreaming and yearning by Caribbean people for a oneness, because of the islandness that separates you, the oneness that joins us together. So economic integration. The second thing is cooperation. How do we cooperate as small island states with limited capacity so that essentially our scale and our scope is enhanced? The third thing is this issue of equity. As you collaborate and you cooperate, how do we make sure that the big countries don't essentially take all the benefits from the integration process? So there is this notion of how we share benefits in the integration arrangement and from the community at large. And the fourth area is foreign policy. How do we as small states pool our resources together so that we can in fact join up our approach to taking decisions in relation to foreign policy? There are times that we agree, and we want to be able to collaborate on those occasions, and there are times when we disagree. We also want to collaborate when we disagree, so that we know what the points of divide is, so that we know too what are in fact what we call the no-fly zones, and that we can find common ways even though there are differences, not to have them essentially divide the areas in which there is commonality. And I think it's worked fairly well. over the last, 1973, when the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, the original treaty, was in fact entered into. It's worked very well since then.
So Patrick, the vast majority of our audience today will be small businesses. And like everywhere else, Trinidad, where you're from today, has a lot of small businesses. Do the Caribbean small businesses have any different issues than anywhere else in the world, or do we all share common issues globally?
I think a lot of the problems with the micro, as we call them, and small businesses in the Caribbean are common. So the issue, for instance, of how do you deal with startup capital, the issues, for instance, of how do we deal with growing a business from day one to the end, when it in fact is of a scale and of its production mixes of a scope. Those are common. So what we're talking about is how do I get the message out there that I have products, services that can meet the consumer needs. So advertising and marketing, that's common. The spend on that, the reach on that, and of course the platform that we use for that, so that transactions grow rather than stagnating, so that the information base grows. Those are common. I think the Caribbean countries have even more difficulties though in relation to finance. How do we raise startup finance, and how do we get, for instance, financing for operations? And I think that's really important for us to hone in on and recognize, because I think so much of the Caribbean's economic growth depends on micro and small enterprises. It's been said by the Caribbean Development Bank study that more than 70% of jobs are created by micro and small enterprises. And they account for, anywhere between 40 and 60% of our gross domestic product. That it's important for us to recognize those limitations and work on them. And another thing that small islands do have in terms of small and micro businesses that are different is the importance of exporting, because your domestic market is small. Even within Caricom, the issue becomes, well, how do we get small businesses to the point where they can in fact successfully export? And I think that's different, because it's different from driving from one county to another. It's different from driving from one state to another. It's different from driving from one municipality to another. You have to cross the water. You have to go through customs, jurisdictions. You have to deal with duties and taxes. You have to deal with logistics that are different in a larger state. So lots of commonality, but there are also some points of differences. And I think that's what makes this, for me, so very exciting and interesting.
So Patrick, you've got some unique problems there with central bank. Can you just share with what they are, and are there any solutions, particularly with export trade?
Yeah, the problems with the central banks are in fact very important for the Caribbean at this time. In fact, they have become a fetter to trade, particularly by micro and small enterprises. In fact, I'm very happy that you picked up on that. While larger enterprises do have problems, because there is a problem of foreign exchange, how do you change or exchange your local currency for the currency in the market where you're going to sell? And even before you get to that, how are you going to use your local currency to pay your foreign suppliers for goods and services that you must pay for either in pounds or United States dollars or Canadian dollars? So there is a foreign exchange problem in a lot of the countries. While there are no restrictions per se, in many countries there's a difficulty, even when you're placed on the authorized list, even when you are allowed to buy the foreign exchange in the domestic market, there is a scarcity. So the issue becomes, how do we get over this scarcity? Because remember, it's different to large countries where you can sell, to the neighboring state. You're now dealing with, how do I cross the water and trade, in our case, the Trinidad dollars, for Eastern Caribbean dollars, and then, how do we get those funds back? So I think for us, the issue of the foreign exchange hurdles, as we call it, is important, and how we get over them, to my mind, is two ways. One, I think we need to, certainly in our case, export more. Let's be very frank, you're not going to hear it very often. It's not sexy for the monetary economists, but we need to export more. We need to do more business so we can earn more foreign currency, so that the pool of foreign currency in the domestic market is going to grow. That's the first thing. The second thing, though, is how do we actually create systems that reduce the demand for, the foreign currency. So, for instance, can I have other innovative arrangements that allow me to net off my exports against, the cost of the raw materials, or my sales here against, the liabilities that I may have in another market. So the mechanism for netting off, Caricom struggled with that for many years. We called it sort of a clearinghouse. How do I get a clearinghouse for all of these financial transactions that arise from the trade in goods and services? And we've not been able to address that very successfully, because all the the central banks have their individual jurisdictions. That remains a problem. How we can get over it, to my mind, is to move to regimes such as barter trade. And how can we create, for instance, a system without creating another currency, so to speak, in the monetary definition of the word? How can we create a system for netting off? That may be, for instance, trading off my goods against your services, or it may be a system where I recognize the value that your goods that I purchase creates, and you recognize the value that my goods or services creates, and we create some mechanism, some kind of informal, non-financial unit of exchange amongst ourselves. You may look at these two as the same, or you may look at them differently. But that's going to be extremely important, because right now, foreign exchange earnings is in fact a fetter, an inhibitor to small and micro businesses doing trade, because in the Caribbean, you must export to earn foreign currency.
Yeah, Patrick, you're very well known in political circles, particularly in Grenada. So what little advantages and nuances does that cause with small business and politics down in the Caribbean?
Politics in the Caribbean is extremely interesting. I think we are caught right now in an interesting place in the political developments of our country, where COVID plus the pre-existing conditions that were there before COVID has led to a search, I believe, by the society at large for a greater voice politically in the process of decision making, in the process of allocation of resources. It's also led to a reinvigoration in the thinking by the Caribbean society and the private sector, which is so important, because the private sector has and will continue to be the engine of growth in Caricom. That we need to double down, we need to become a lot more innovative, we need to start looking both inwardly within Caricom at the export opportunities that exist that have not been harvested before, but also externally at how we connect with global value chains to do what we spoke about earlier in terms of earning foreign exchange and growing exports. So that the politics and the economics are both at an interesting place in Caricom, where if there is one thing that I can speak about, is that there is a strong recognition and a strong demand for change.
So if this puts you on the spot a little bit, if you were the Prime Minister and you had some extra strategies for dealing with COVID, have you had any thoughts on what, one or two of those strategies might be in terms of help or assistance or something else?
Well, that's an interesting question. Let me answer it this way. I believe that the Caribbean needs to have management teams at the political level. Not one person, not a prime minister, but a management team with a consistent commitment to change. And with a management team with a consistent commitment to change, I believe that what needs to be done is that we need to plow new ground and look for new solutions, the seeds of innovation for the small and micro businesses in the Caribbean. I believe that's the hidden success factor that will grow the Caribbean out of this crisis. Let me say to you that with the numbers that I've spoken about earlier, If we can, for instance, give the micro and small enterprises, the private sector, the incentives and the support to innovate, to adapt, to trade, to export. If we can reduce the burdens and the hurdles that these small and micro businesses continue to face, then I believe that that itself is the hidden seed that many of the economies are going to be looking at. My view is that this next decade will depend on how do we dynamize all the resources in our country, where a lot of them are small and micro. How do we dynamize all of them? Because I think there is a role too for the large enterprises that have been doing well, and many of them are outside the region, and absolutely they can do better. But we need to take the shackles off micro and private sector enterprise participation in the economic process. That's what the management team, which includes a prime minister, whether myself, someone else, a management team, that's what they can work on. That's what they can do. We need to dust off the strategies that many of the countries have, wonderful strategies, and put them to work.
Very wise. Patrick, you've been around the world and connected with many interesting people. Who's the most interesting person that you've ever connected up with, and why was that?
You know, that's a very interesting question. I'm going to give you two. Try as I might, as I travel the world, I come back to just the phenomenal role that my mother would have played. I come back to the fact that with the limited resources that she has had, having never been to secondary school, but having done what you would call then the HSE, from home in the developing countries back in the 1950s, on our own, getting 6 passes and using that and the resources that she had to teach and to motivate so many others, and to use that, to touch the groups that have been disadvantaged, spending a lot of time with the deaf education network in Jamaica, where we grew up, and then taking it back to Grenada, and then taking it to St. Lucia, to have the limited resources that she had and to have given so much to our community and our region is something that I believe is just absolutely phenomenal. I hope to emulate her in that way. Another one who's dynamized me is a chap who taught me in Form 6. His name is George Brizan. And he really, my father was an economist, but so my father gave me the desire. But as with many of us, we don't want to follow in our father's footsteps. But George was also an economist. And I think he gave me the thirst and the desire really to pursue this discipline that my father himself had pursued, even though I tried to run from it, and to appreciate the importance of us working as a developing country to identify our own resources, our own strengths, and to believe in ourselves and to understand that we were part of a global network. George would say to us that I'm training you, but I'm training you for the world. I'm training you so you can go out there, because the world is a big place, he would say, laughingly. I'm training you so that you can go out there, and the investment I'm making in you, whether it's in ideas or goods or services, you can go out there and really do us proud in the world, because that is how our country is going to grow. So for many people, they talk about the Caribbean as suffering from brain drain. In a sense, George Brizan thought that that was a good problem to have, because he felt it was a great opportunity for small countries to continue training, investing in specialist skills, so that their people could go out there and they could do the region proud. And as a diaspora, they can continue doing what they do and returning some benefits home, not just in terms of remittances, money, but in terms of ideas and in terms of their own commitment to growing the network. That was George Brizan, phenomenal historian, economic historian. And I want to say that in addition to my mother, he was just incredible, character. By the way, they were actually quite good friends. So, there you go figure.
Come together as a pair.
Absolutely.
So, Patrick, you've just taken up the chairmanship of the Grenada Movement. Can you just share that a little bit as to what that does?
Yeah, I think the Grenada movement is the natural progression of a lot of the ideas that many of us have had, particularly at this COVIDious time, as we say, of trying to ensure that there is a strong voice by civil society in the direction that the country takes, in the case of Grenada, particularly at this time. I think it's been long in coming, but I think what has really brought the importance of starting the movement now is that we recognize that outside of the partisan political process in Grenada, where you either belong to one party or the other in a two-party state, there is a growing center that needs to have a voice. And we intend to be the voice for the growing center in speaking to the issues of policy, in speaking to the issues of solutions, and in speaking to the issues of the non-political, non-governmental group in the society that wants to contribute, not just in terms of words, but by their actions and their coming together. So this issue of creating a network again for people who are outside the traditional areas of politics, of associations, organizations that are parastatals, is so important to us because we believe it's an indispensable feature of our constitutional democracy. A constitutional democracy, particularly in Grenada where there is no official opposition, a constitutional democracy cannot function well if there is a perception that there's absolute power, that one party, the government, has all the seats, that the separation of powers appear, the word is appear, to be being blurred. We believe that the need for an organization like the Grenada Movement is absolutely critical in those circumstances so that we can essentially represent the alternative view. Interesting.
Patrick, there's been some major changes in the political scene in America recently that everybody's aware of. Do you think that'll have any impact at all on the Caribbean?
Let me tell you that we are hoping that the change in administration brings with it a change in the policies regarding the health and in particular COVID. From the health perspective, I mentioned it not as a general catch-all, but we hope that it leads to a commitment, a recommitment by the United States to the World Health Organization and to the Pan American Health Organization. We think it's going to take more resources, not just the United States doing what it has historically done, but a recommitment to that by injecting more resources in that, which of course will benefit humanity. So we think that's where the health thing's important. Where COVID's important, we think it's really important that the US, where so much of our own diaspora reside and work, and where so many of us either have to transit through or vacation, or where our children attend universities, we think it's really important for them to get COVID and the rate of infections under control. That has a direct bearing on us. In fact, if you look at the demographics of the COVID infections in the Caribbean islands, most of it has come from North America and in particular from the United States. So we are joined in this global network that globalization spawned together. It will take a global responsibility, but it will take local action. Follow me, local action. And the action that the United States needs to take now at this time is to do all things possible to get its own rate of infection under control and really to help us protect the commons that is in fact our hemisphere, where we are only joined by immigration borders, but where the fluidity of people, yes, and goods and services, yes, is so very intertwined that when, as we said historically, the United States on fire, the Caribbean has to wet its own house. So we think that the United States needs to shut down that fire because if we wet our house and it keeps blazing, ultimately it's going to continue, affecting us. And we want to avoid that. Even as I speak to you today, there are problems with Grenada. There are problems with a couple other countries where the rate of infection in the US coming from the second wave, and in some people's minds, the third wave. is a major draw on the government resources. We can't afford it.
Patrick, I'd love to speak for another hour, but time catches up with us, and it's been my pleasure to have you on the program today, and I'm sure that the people out there will get some great value listening to your thoughts from a different perspective than what we have on this global reach out to small business and connected parties. So Patrick, it's been a pleasure to have you on the program today, and I'd really thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to share your wisdom with everybody out there.
Thank you so much, John. It's a pleasure being with you. And this is the time for us to have new solutions. And barter trade is an essential part of that which the Caribbean needs to embrace to get ahead. Thank you so much.